All right. Well, it is now 2:03, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Best Practices for Transforming FP&A webinar. My name is Mike Mooney, and I head up business development at Carlson Management Consulting. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar itself will last 45 minutes, along with time to answer any questions that you may have. You can enter your questions in the chat section of the Zoom panel. Please feel free to enter those throughout the course of the webinar today. We are recording this webinar, and we'll make it available in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with your colleagues. So we'll be certain to send that along upon request. We have a lot to cover, and to get the ball rolling, I'd like to introduce Kevin O'Brien, our Vice President here at Carlson Management Consulting. Kevin comes to us with more than 20 years of experience in senior finance roles, including controller and CFO. He is also a CPA in the state of Ohio. Kevin has managed a number of projects for our clients in industries such as manufacturing, nonprofit, software, media, biotech, and others. So without any further ado, take it away, Kevin.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody. We appreciate everybody joining us this afternoon. We will do our very best to make this a informative, productive experience for you, and we'll be respectful of your time and get wrapped up on time as planned. I think the idea today is as we were going through this, I found this to be a very enjoyable project to put this together. As much as we do this every day, stepping back and really taking a good hard look at this was an enjoyable project. And as always, we learn a few things when we do that. The topics for today, as you probably saw when you enrolled, we're going to talk a little bit about drivers that have a real impact on the budget. We're going to talk a bit about KPIs that make reports easier to understand and also to create awareness. We're going to talk about a cadence for rolling forecasts. We're going to talk about reporting not only from a board report standpoint, but also from a informational analysis report standpoint. And we'll also talk just a little bit in general about the cloud and how we can most effectively leverage it. Real life examples will be a part of what we do today. To prepare for this, what I did is interviewed a couple of my colleagues and actually 3 of our clients. And at the end, when we put it all together, we ended up getting some examples from a variety of industries, including a software company, a nonprofit, a manufacturer, healthcare examples, and media. Needless to say, we have a lot of different industries represented here. We probably have people at very different stages along where they are on this curve. So hopefully some of these stories will create a common theme and a common story and some parallels. And I think you'll find, I hope you'll find that you'll see a lot of parallels as we cross over the industries, and you will be able to apply that. Even within a given industry, obviously the examples are going to be very different. I'll even share an example a little bit later that within one organization, there were several different examples and way to slice and dice because they had different lines of work that they used. So the hope is, again, that you can take some things away, maybe get even a little bit excited, I'll call it. I got a little bit excited going through this when I saw some of the things that can be done that would really make a difference. I think if I had to recap what we'll cover or what we'll talk about, or what the message would be, is that the folks I talked to shared a lot about the idea that they can have a forward-looking view on things, that they can really be doing things that impact what's going on in their business, that they can truly help businesses and organizations make effective decisions. And that's really what this is all about. We're certainly going to have an eye to the historical side of things, but very much with an eye to the future. So how can you individually apply some of these processes? We'll talk a little bit about application tools. I'll show a couple of examples of application tools, but really we want to focus on the process and the methodology for things. So with that, I'm going to jump ahead to a little bit of background on Carlson. And some of you probably know us well. Some of you are maybe meeting us for the first time. We are about 8 years old now, and we were founded in 2010. And as you can see, have 4 offices. We also have a nationwide staff of people that cross literally the entire U.S., across the states. All of our folks tend to be finance leaders, former CFOs, former FP&A folks who have hopefully lived in your life, in your shoes, done the kind of things that you have done in the past, and hopefully can understand and be helpful to you. We've done over 325 cloud financial systems implementations and optimizations, and our goal is to partner with best-in-class solutions and provide the proper combination for our clients to get the results that they're looking for. As you can see, we have been honored to be an Inc. 5000 award winner for the third consecutive year, Boston Business Journal Fast 50, and we were just a few weeks ago awarded the Adaptive Insights North American Partner of the Region for the Americas for fiscal year 2018. So just a little bit of background on who we are and what we do, just to give it a little context to today. So let's get into this. So the first area that we'd like to speak to is just around the idea of being a driver-based organization. And when we start to break that down, we hear the word drivers a lot, but what does it really mean? And as I go off to the right there in the orange area, we'll talk a little bit about blending financial with non-financial data. And I'll give you several examples of that and how that might be implemented and utilized. How do we just set up a discrete set of business drivers? And I think the key is to obviously select the right drivers, the drivers that have true meaning. And I'll share some examples on that. The linkages between the drivers across the organization. In other words, cause and effect. If it's not one thing, it's the other. And let's drill down all the way to the root cause of things. Improve collaboration and get everybody in sync. If everybody can see the issue and identify it, it allows them to get in sync and dig a little bit deeper. And this all starts with a more holistic picture of company performance. So a few examples. I think one way to look at drivers might be the ones that are a little more static and less critical. For example, things like payroll tax rates, the new FICA rates for 2018, unemployment rates, things of that nature. They're important drivers, they're important assumptions, but they're probably a little more static. You tend to set them and forget them. Health insurance rates and benefit rates tend to be that. They might change perhaps annually or things of that nature. There's also ones that tend to be a little bit more dynamic, and that varies by industry. And just a couple high-level examples. In healthcare, it might be things like the number of procedures or the average rate per procedures or the number of patient days, things of that nature. In an environment of maybe higher ed, it might be things around enrollment or percentage of accepted students that will come, returning students percentages. And you folks know these all probably much better than I, but the point being, they all vary, but I think they have a common theme that they become drivers for how do we best look at our organizations and move forward. In a software company or a subscription-based company, it's things like run rate and closing rates. It's things like renewal rates. An 85 versus a 90 versus a 95% rate tends to make a big difference. It tends to be on the front ends, bookings, and how bookings translate into revenue. One of the folks I talked to explained to me, yes, I have to do my reporting in GAAP, and I get that, but GAAP doesn't really rule how I think about things. What I really need to think about is cash flow and forecasting my cash flow and determining when I can invoice and when I can collect that. And those kind of things are the drivers that really start to make a difference. And those are the drivers that people want to see as they took a forward-looking view into things. In a nonprofit, an example I had was this organization had different cost centers, and they wanted to identify drivers specific to the individual cost centers within the very same organization. So this company does some transportation for developmental disabilities customers, and one of the things they wanted to measure was cost per mile, cost per passenger. They wanted to be able to plot those things out. So what they did is they took financial numbers that were already in existence, and then they added other non-financial numbers, number of passengers, number of trips, things of that nature, and were able to run calculations that were very effective to what they were trying to do and really told a story on things. And that was the key to finding the root cause. They were able to level the playing field because they have different groups and different fundings that have different kinds of agreements, and they were able to find kind of a common language of something that people could identify. They could also demonstrate the history of that, and as the history evolved, they can show the history, they can look at trends, things of that nature. When they start to look at new funders or they look ahead, they've got a history and they can display that quickly and easily, and that, they said, can be very effective and very helpful to them. They can also start to create graphical representations. You see a picture of it on the slide, and to look at things. And in their example, they said, let's look at things like fuel cost. And they said, you know, what are the variables to that? And volumes of miles, the fuel price, vehicle repairs. So if we have trends going in the right or wrong direction, you know, why is that? And you'll hear several other examples. And what was interesting is they tend to cross all industries. They just have a bit of a different nuance. How do we take this relevant information, drill it down in a more granular way, and find answers? In high level, we tend to see things like margins, sales and margins. And I'll share a story in a little bit about contribution margin, you know, annual returns on things, return on investment, things of that nature. Over in the upper right, things like retention rates, customer satisfaction. I had a story where there were some high warranty costs, which was a higher KPI or a higher, important KPI. And that starts to lead to what's our production quality, or it might mean in certain types of industries, our retention rates, our customer satisfactions, the value of a customer, things like employee satisfaction, turnover. We had several examples about things like overtime. Well, is my overtime high because I have employee turnover? Is it because I have a higher volume of work that I need? Does that mean I need to, look at my hiring a little bit more closely? Does it mean that I need to add some people because our volumes are higher? And will that volume be perpetuating itself? So those are the kind of things that I heard a lot about. And what I liked about it, again, is a forward-thinking view. The product defects, utilization, that came out similar to the warranty example that I shared previously. So when we start to look at that and break that down, it might look in an application something like this: financial statement drivers. And this is just one general example, but these drivers can be built out and set up, and here's a specific example, to the specifications that people need. Obviously, the stories I shared had some different slants and different angles to them, but along the same theme. So we can take drivers like this, set those up, and be able to reforecast and run the appropriate numbers. And that is critical, but what's nice about it is it's easy to do. I've seen something that's more baseline chart by month. I've seen things that are more a little bit elaborate, that have greater levels of detail and kind of a grid type look and things of that nature. So as you look at what you're doing, try to figure out what the core drivers are to your business and how to most effectively utilize those. Driver-based budgeting enables active planning. And we talk a lot about active versus static planning. I think I used that early on when I talked about the drivers. But I think the be-all, end-all is simply to define your drivers effectively. And there tends to be a bit of a spillover between drivers and KPIs. We probably all define those a little bit differently, but understand what the key ones are to your business. Limit them to a manageable number. We don't need to have, a ridiculously high number that just causes people just to zone out a bit. Let's find some things that are effective. And in the stories that people told me, what I found is that when we drilled it down to a reasonable amount, presented those in a way that was easy to understand, it got people's attention. I'll share a story a little bit later about contribution margin that really got people's attention, and it was a big eye-opener. The renewal rates, things I talked about earlier. How do we identify the appropriate assumptions? How do we leverage calculations for quick updates that can be updated real time and adjusted for changing conditions, and how they flow through our financial model so that we can really take a good look? Another thing I heard a lot of was historical reporting is great, and it's important, and we need it. And we need to do our run against our budget that we lock down at the beginning of the fiscal or calendar year. And that's great, and that's important, and we should do that, and that's the best practice. But we also need to be forecasting with an eye to the future. So the point being, as we adjust those drivers, that they have a waterfall effect and show us and give us a clear picture of what's moving ahead. Obviously, automating that output to both reports and dashboards is effective. Both are good. Sometimes the dashboard gives us kind of a picture is worth 1,000 words. And one person shared with me, that gives us the big picture, but I still need to drill a little deeper into the numbers, but it gives me a quick visual of what it is that I need to be thinking about and what I need to be looking at. So let's start to talk about KPIs here. KPIs can be a great gauge of a company, but you've got to pick the right ones. In a real estate environment, it might be the number of units leased or the number of units that are not leased. And, why is that? Maybe is it because, people are not renewing quickly enough? Is it we're not renting up quickly enough? And those same themes seem to resonate throughout. Drivers could be the size of budgets or tenants or whatever the case may be. In manufacturing, it might be things like headcount. And I heard headcount in several examples of several of the people I talked to. That's an important area. It's a significant area. How does that impact the numbers? How does that impact the ratios and the KPIs that we use? I mentioned the contribution margin. I'll elaborate on that a little bit more. This individual said having a good pulse on that dramatically changed how we manage our business, because we've got limited resources we've got to allocate, and we've got to know how to make decisions with that. So in this example, they started to be able to create a granularity of the contribution margin. They used to be able to see it in one big number. And now that they could break it down, it was a real eye-opener. And they used to just attribute the margin to the mix of products, right? We have a lot of this and a lot of that, and it was just about such and such general percent of X, and that was fine. But when we started to be able to break things down into pieces, there were eye-openers, and there were things that were low margin and high margin, and we just used to write that off to the mix. Now we can take a much closer look and make decisions. Maybe there's issues with our costs. Maybe there's issues with our pricing. Maybe there are issues with our product mix. Maybe we had a specific example where someone had to actually do some renegotiation with the customer because when they took a closer look, they found that the numbers were not working effectively. There's only one way to do that, is to have KPIs, understand your variables, and do that effectively. I mentioned overtime hours. That was one that came up in a few different industries and a few different examples. And how are we tracking those overtime hours? Meaning, is it a staffing issue? Is it a volume issue? Do I have turnover that causes too much overtime? What is causing that? I mentioned renewal rates. I mentioned new sales. How does that work? Just GAAP and financial reporting doesn't necessarily give me what I need. So how do I do that? Identify the top 20% of your GL accounts. One of the folks I talked to explained that truly they had a significant number of GL accounts, but there were a few of them that were the big ones, and they typically tend to be some kind of direct cost. In this case, might be material, could be labor costs. What are the top accounts? Let's worry about those. Let's figure out the building blocks of those accounts. I talked about things like fuel costs and cost per mile and things of that nature. Work through those and get all the way to the core. So here's an example where if we dig just a little bit deeper, just one general example, but if we start to look at this GL account and say it really becomes a customer account times a renewal price. And what is your computation? What is your driver? What is your KPI? Or maybe there's a renewal side of it in a renewal rate, and maybe price increases are factored in there. But those renewal rates, if I dig a layer deeper, tend to be impacted by things like customer satisfaction. So let's talk about that. That might mean product defects. That might mean on-time go-lives. That might be operational effectiveness. And that quality theme seemed to resonate in most of the examples that I had. In the application we use, we create metrics like this, and they become a combination of financial data and non-financial data, meaning number of employees, number of trips I use an example of, number of units this, number of that. And as you can see here, there are several different metrics that are built out here. Average expenses, different kind of metrics. And we can do these in a myriad of ways. The key is just to get the right ones. As I hope you can see here, this is very concise, very easy to follow. The other thing when we get to rolling forecasts, what we'll talk about is just this combination of budgets and actuals. And as you can see here, the green numbers represent actual numbers that we're bringing in over the months. And we can start to look at trends, and we can start to say, how do these ratios look? How do these numbers look historically versus what we are forecasting? And these forecast numbers can be adjusted based upon different conditions that we see, what has truly happened in the more current months versus when we set up this budget several months ago. And it really allows us to take a forward look at what we're doing. We can do these in numbers, which I think is a very effective method, but we can also do it if people like to consume their information in more of a visual sense. And there are a lot of folks out there who just prefer to see it this way, or they process it more effectively this way, versus rows and numbers, which a lot of us in this group today probably are fans of. The picture is worth 1,000 words. I always suggest people use this as their homepage when they log in the morning, because it just gives them a quick focal point on things. Now, when we see things that are out of whack, we might need to go deeper into the detail, but at least we've got a picture that we can work from. What are the real drivers of your accounts? Number 3, rolling forecasts. Setting up a cadence for rolling forecasts. And the rolling forecast concept several years ago, this is my 8th year doing this. I've been in finance for quite some time. But the rolling forecast was kind of a missionary concept back in those early days, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I think it's now more of a bit of common knowledge that we should be doing that. But I think starts to become now is the how-to of it. The questions to be thinking about are, strategically, what is it we're trying to accomplish with these forecasts? We've talked about KPIs, we've talked about measurement. What is it we're really trying to measure? And how do we create the rolling forecast? Again, the recurring theme I got was historical is great, but we need to have an eye looking forward. So think about things like, how often do we need to do this, right? It might be a function of your market, because I think being able to effectively forecast is it's cultural, it's frequency, it's how we get our information, it's how often can we really do it to be effective. So if you're in a more dynamic kind of a market, and it was funny, in very different industries, everyone felt like their markets were all very dynamic, and that's probably a correct statement. So we all probably have a dynamic market, but that starts to say, how frequently should I do this? I think quarterly is the norm that we see most frequently. We often work with our clients of bringing in their actuals on a monthly basis. We also have people who bring in their actuals on a daily basis or a weekly basis. But when we talk about the reforecast, I think we need to think about the frequency. I think there's a quality versus quantity issue. It's easy to say more frequently is better. Easy to say that. But do we really have the knowledge to do it more frequently? What is effective to get the job done? If we do it more frequently and we don't really do much with it, what is the productivity? What is the effectiveness of that exercise? So generally, I think somewhere in the quarterly or monthly is effective, but that's not to say you shouldn't do it more quickly. Now, that also means you could be looking at these KPIs, these drivers, probably each and every day. So I think we've got different time frames going here. We need to be very active and dynamic in reviewing the numbers every day, but we can reforecast as frequently as is appropriate. What data do you need? I mentioned bringing in actuals, and certainly actuals is an important part of it, so we can examine trends, get a closer view. How far out do you need to be looking? Certainly we need to be looking out during the current fiscal year. Maybe we need, but that obviously shortens halfway through the year. We've got 6 months to go. Maybe we need to be looking out a full year, and or 2, and or 3, and or 4. Obviously a shorter term versus a longer term forecast. We need kind of a picture of the future. Where does this data reside? We see a lot of folks bringing in different applications. For example, some kind of a revenue or a sales pipeline. We see that still comes from Excel for a lot of people. That comes from something, an application like a Salesforce for a lot of people. What other boutique applications do you have? And I want to start talking a little bit about integration, and it's a bleed into the report. Integration, as you know, is a dramatic time saver. I need to be able to get my information moved across quickly and effectively. So when I'm reforecasting, I want to be able to get that information and bring it across. We have found that we are now able to integrate just about any type of financial data, non-financial data, to get it into your system quickly so that you can be reforecasting. Real life story, the cadence, right? One of the people shared with me, we're not there yet, or this is the hardest part, or we're working on it. So this is somebody who's got their budgeting and they've been able to really make some great strides, and now they're starting to roll it out to managers. And that becomes a bit of a cultural thing. That becomes a little bit of a teaching thing, a follow-up kind of thing. But they like what they have because they said, hey, we can give our managers access to this information. And I think that's an argument also to the cloud in general. We can give our managers access to this information. We can let them work on their own. We can let them save this off as a new version, meaning their own version that they can work on their own and play around with it. So, what they're going to do is say, go take a look at this, see what you think, gain a little bit of ownership with it. Now let's have a conversation. And having that in a very simple way tends to be very powerful. This individual said, I've been wanting to do this for 5 years, but it took me a while to get there. We've been in it now. They got some new folks on board with a fresher attitude on these things, and they were able to get that in place, and they're very pleased with it. The tendency is people tend to get stuck in what they have currently or what's working for them, and tend not to look at the options of what they can do forward. So let's start to create a forecast, and let's really do something with it. The way it looks for us is something along the lines of this. And I take a simple expenses sheet here just to demonstrate that we all have access to different accounts, but I can start to bring across the year as I get in my March numbers a little ahead of the game here. What does the rest of the year look like? Because the conditions have changed. I need to know what those look like. So this is where we can go in and start to reforecast. And these things can be broken down into smaller increments, meaning if managers have different departments or lower level departments that feed into the whole, it can be broken down at a smaller level. So another example I had on rolling forecasts, and it was interesting because it was in two directions. So the first one was, we still measured a budget, right? But there are times when we need to be changing direction. And we need to change directions because we're observing things in the marketplace. Our competitors are doing something different. Conditions have changed. So we budgeted in area A and B, but maybe we need to lower those numbers and we need to create more emphasis on area C and D. The conditions of the market, the observations we make require us to do that. So that's the direction of what's going on, telling us how to revise the numbers. The other way, which is what we've been talking about today, is sometimes the numbers tell us the directions. When we start to see trends, those tell us maybe we need to strategize in a different means. Bringing those two things together and looking at them both allows us to do what we need to do. Because there's some things that are in our control, some things that are out of our control. How do we take a look at that, share that with people who can help us make those decisions and make course corrections? How do we pivot and move to another area? We like to call that agility. Let's talk a little bit about reporting. Board reports that inform and impress. So what does that mean? So the first thing I'll say is that I think board reporting is really important. We all work hard. We put a lot of effort into our numbers and our things, and our reporting is kind of our picture, our deliverable, and what people see. I think it needs to look good. I think it needs to be, impressive and informative. Great story I heard from someone was they said, what I was able to do with my board is demonstrate to them that a static budget, meaning a flat budget, meaning just the end of the year, once a year, it just doesn't work. And what she has done in this issue is she's created 3 columns in her reports. She brings in her actuals. She brings in her fixed budgets locked in, but she also brings in her rolling forecast. And that rolling forecast includes tweaks for the things they have done based upon the observations they have made. It could be things as simple as we've added 10 people in a certain department, or we've reduced another department. We've made changes to our benefit package. We've gained a customer, we've lost a customer. That rolling forecast is effective. And she's been able to get people thinking a little bit differently kind of forward. And they can start to see how this makes a little bit more sense. And yeah, it's important to have a fixed budget, absolutely, but it's not strategic. And it doesn't allow us to look forward. So we need something that can move and grow with an organization. Another person said to me before they entered their role and started really becoming active here, they said, I look at this organization as I walk in and I see amazing amounts of potential. But the problem is they're operating from a position of lack, meaning they don't have what they need to be able to do what they need to do. And they can't really see a direct path out to get where they need to get to. And by demonstrating through reporting, by providing updates and drivers, she's been able to start to move that in a different direction, and it's working. Another example on reporting, someone shared with me, I can see things sliced and diced. I've got 2 different entities. I've got different cost centers in there. I can see that information. I can drill through. I've got a better means of evaluating things. When I do my financials every month, instead of spending a bunch of time bringing across numbers, which took me a day and then a day or 2 of work, what I can start to do now is use reports to find completeness, meaning, is there anything missing? Is there anything that's out of whack? Is there anything that doesn't look right? I can step back and look at this. So preparing the financials now allows us to assess completeness of the financials. But what it also does is starts to create predictive forecasting. So how do we do that? The key is to make it faster and more efficient. It tends to be time intensive, literally days of effort. I hear that all the time. And I can take literally what takes days and do it in minutes. So create a methodology to do that. I talked about integration earlier. It's an effective tool to get that information across. Invest the time to have that set up. That way you don't have to worry about errors. You can do more predictive testing, or like I said, help people find completeness in the financials. We've all had the last minute change at 6 o'clock at night. We can avert some of those challenges by having something that works quickly and easily. Formatting. Interesting about formatting, I have 2 different stories that are very different. The first was, we have a format that works well, that our people want to see, our senior management wants to see. We want to be able to do it faster and more effectively. We want to slice and dice, but we like our formats. So in that case, what we're going to do is replicate their formats and make them look pretty much the same. Will we add things? Will we tweak them? I anticipate that we will, but we like what we have, and that's good, and we can do that. In the second example, we're more in an evolutionary development example, and these truly happened literally this week. We're in more of an evolutionary stage, more of a startup mode, so we're open to new formats. So we could start with what we have, but we're very open to do something that creates a little bit better picture of what we're doing. A couple examples of those things. We have reports that reside here in our system that are within HTML. And this somewhat demonstrates the story I told about the person who was able to include actuals in their budget, working budget, and more of a forecast in a columnar format. These are very easy to put together, but they're very effective. We've had many, many stories of people working in the conference room or working on a call like we're on, where that they can make those adjustments on the fly and really tell a good picture. We've seen a lot of examples where a what if scenario column might be in here, where we can play the what if game. What if we adjust this? What if we do that? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if we have a best case scenario, a worst case scenario? Reporting allows us to do that. So this is a first level of reporting. We talked about the visual level of reporting. And then the third level, we talked about it in how this opened up, was talking more about board reporting. And the board reporting is more in a format. In our world, we use something called Office Connect. And what it does is it brings in all the numbers from our budgeting application. And those numbers come across here, as you can see in the colors, those numbers come across here. And I'm able to quickly and easily see them in what they are, but I'm also easily able to update those. So if I have changes, I can bring numbers in and those numbers are immediately updated. And as you can see, we can do things like charts. I reference things like charts and visuals. I can also do that here. I've seen these where these can have tabs all the way across for our various locations, so I can quickly and easily either drill by location or be able to work across the bottom by location. And I start to see the metrics that we talked about today. I can have those right here in my report book, a picture of my metrics. I can then have my baseline financial statements quickly and easily. Cash flow, mentioned cash flow earlier. Forecasting cash flow seems to be universally a very important area, year-over-year comparisons, and things we can do to move forward. So when we talk about reporting, some challenges, but a significant amount of opportunity out there to do a good job with your reporting. So perhaps look at integration, look at your reports, look at what you can do to help teach and show folks how to most effectively be forward thinking. And finally, leverage of the cloud. Obviously, today's entire conversation is around the cloud. The things I heard were almost a bit of a spillover or weave into everything we've talked about today. But the first thing is simply we have access. One person told me about, in our case, we have folks literally all over the world, and they can get in and get their information. We obviously have a self-serve environment, so we are not the clearinghouse for, hey, I need this, hey, I need that. Folks can get in and review their own data. And I mentioned earlier, it tends to be a bit of a culture change, but we've also found that it works and people do get involved with it. And if you give it to them in an easy format, it works. So the simple concept, we're trying to get rid of spreadsheets. We have version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I hear that story all the time. One version of the truth. And one of the folks I talked to said, literally the number one benefit of this sort of a methodology is it's a central repository of the truth. And said if you can set it up correctly, it's just amazing what it can do for you. So I think those simple access issues, one version of the truth issues are out there. Then there's the issues of just the time thing. Another quote I got was, it literally would take days to do what we can do now in our current application. It's flexible and scalable. If I add a location, if I add a cost center, if I add a product, if I add a program, if I add a fund, I can easily scale that and make adjustments. A little bit difficult to do that in an Excel environment. We've all probably lived that before. We're worried about the errors or the impact, and we got to rebuild things. Adapts to a best-in-class systems strategy. You know, we integrate with different ERPs. You can get your best ERP. You can get your best CRM, be it a Salesforce or whatever methodology you so desire. We start to see best-in-class around, you know, other applications, expenses and such. We can bring those all together quickly using the cloud and bring the best pieces in. I always say it like going through the buffet line. I can select the things I want to put on my plate and bring those together. In our organization, we use Adaptive Insights. We use Intact. We use Salesforce. We use Nexonia for expenses, and it works really well for us, and it's fully integrated. You always have the most latest, greatest technology. There's typically updates quarterly or so, and you can get to it anywhere, anytime. So that becomes a methodology of integration. And I shared a little bit what our system looks like every system, this is the design model we use. How do we bring in the appropriate data sources to what it is that we need, and how do we integrate that? And if there's a new application that comes in down the road, we can bring that in effectively. It's not difficult to do. So as I recap, I just want to say there's lots you can do. I'm sure some of it's done. I hope you get a little bit of an inspiration or some ideas of some things that you can really do to make a difference in your organization. So with that, I'd like to say thanks to everybody for joining in. I want to appreciate thank you for your time and energy. If you do want to learn more, I'll leave this up on the screen. We would love to have a more detailed conversation with you as appropriate. If you have any questions or whatever, this is the way to reach us. So with that, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We do have a couple of questions that did pop up through the course of the webinar, and if you'd like to address these, Kevin, I'll start off with, so you're showing a cloud-based budgeting solution. How do you get folks who want to stick to their spreadsheets on board? Our company's a bit old school, and I've tried, and there is still resistance.
Great question, tough question. I think it's probably just to demonstrate the benefits. I made a comment, and this was something that somebody shared with me, is people tend to be comfortable in what they know and what they use. And we've certainly encountered this before. But, what I found is that people, and the people I talk to are literally passionate about this. And I guess the answer is just to demonstrate the benefits. And whenever we do use cases or studies, we talk about the benefits. And I think those benefits that might, resonate with people are, we're going to save a lot of time. We're all just so busy we can't move. We're going to save a lot of time. We're going to get you information more clearly. We're going to get you information that is more accurate. We're going to get you what you need to make decisions. So I think people that are interested in that, hopefully, are willing to take a look. And I think that these things are much easier to execute than they used to be. So agreed, tough question, a bit of a missionary work, but hopefully those kind of things demonstrate a value and a significant payback for folks. Hope that helps.
Excellent. We had one other question that popped up, and it was specific to integration. The question is, can you explain a little bit more about the Data Blend application? What kind of applications can you connect to, and how often can you schedule imports?
Absolutely. And I'll speak layman's terms in the guise of an accounting guy. But basically, the Data Blend application that we have allows us to bring data in from, say, an ERP system, which is obviously most common. And we've integrated with many, many ERP systems. It also might be other source systems. I think I shared a few examples with that, with things like CRM or other boutique source systems. There are several different ways to do it. As long as you can push the information out of your source system, we can get it across. And that's generally a standard thing now. As far as the frequency, we can do it as frequently as you would like. I did share, weekly and monthly and things of that nature. We do have a company that does it, literally every day. And we have one that even does it beyond more frequently during the course of the day. I think it's every hour or so. It can also be done on demand, meaning if I'm running those journal entries at 6 o'clock at night and I need to rerun my reports, I can go in and run it on demand if it's not due to run till tomorrow. So a lot of flexibility and a lot of options, which didn't exist a few years ago. So good opportunity there.
And actually one more.
Thank you. Hope that helps. Yep,
one more question did pop up, and that's, can the data be exported into Excel?
Absolutely. It can be exported. For the examples I showed you here, that anything that I showed you literally can be exported into Excel at the push of a button. So the answer is very much a yes. The stuff that is more permanent in nature, that's reporting, we run in the Office Connect application because it's formatted. Those HTML reports that I showed you can be spit out into Excel. The sheets that I showed you, the worksheets, can be spit out down to an Excel. So the answer is absolutely yes.
Fantastic. Well, it does appear as we have answered all the questions that have come in, but to Kevin's point earlier, if you do have any questions that pop up after the webinar, please do not hesitate to send us a note with any questions. Give us a call, and if there is a desire to see any of the systems that were mentioned, we're happy to always set up demonstrations to dive a little bit deeper into each solution. And again, thank you, Kevin, for taking us through the webinar today, and we truly appreciate everyone that was able to attend. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks to everyone. Have a good one.